So thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I love talking with producers, especially a group of young producers like yourself. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you, Kajal, for inviting me to talk about my favorite topic, which is taking care of newborn beef calves. And I literally have a 3-hour talk about this coming up in the summer. So condensing it into 10 minutes was a bit of a challenge. I'm trying not to talk way too fast, but I might because I'm going to get excited and try and cover as much ground as we can tonight. So my outline for tonight is pretty straightforward. We're going to talk about how to get them out, get them up, and get them fed. So we'll start with getting them out. So this is the participatory part, so I'll try and see your lovely faces. How many of you have seen a calf born? Give me a thumbs up, virtual or little, or yep, perfect. Okay, lots of you have seen a calf born. Perfect, I would expect that with the Angus Club. How many of you have helped a calf be born or helped a cow deliver a calf? Lots of you have experience doing that too. Awesome, good stuff. You probably have more experience than some of my vet students. That's really nice to see, good stuff. So you are already familiar with what a difficult calving is. You've seen that, a lot of you. What you might not already know, or maybe you do, that difficult calvings are the leading cause of why we lose calves in the beef industry. So over a quarter of our beef calf losses are related to issues around birth. So it's a really important time for our newborn baby calves. And we did a study where we asked producers across Western Canada how many calves they helped deliver. And almost 14% of their heifers, they helped deliver their calves. Over 3% of their cows, they had to assist at delivery. And so more than 5% of our calves need help coming into the world. And that's all breeds. We didn't just pick Angus. So I know you guys represent on this, that your numbers are lower, but these are across a large number of producers in Western Canada. I realized maybe I shouldn't talk about difficult calvings at an Angus Club because you guys are well ahead in the world in this, but we'll talk about it anyways. I'm sure there'll be something useful. I hope at least anyways. So we had lots of questions about assistance at calving, but one of the questions that I wanted to tell you about tonight was the question we asked, which was, how hard do we have to pull when we're delivering a calf, right? So we did this study, which we affectionately refer to as the pulled beef study, where we created these modified calving chains. And I think hopefully you can see my pointer, but essentially we've got regular old calving chains here, but we put this fancy device, homemade a device that we made, connected to those calving chains so we could measure how much pressure was put on those chains. And then we pulled a bunch of calves and we classified them either as a manual assist, which was 1 or 2 people pulling them manually just with chains and handles, or mechanical assistance where we used a calf jack. And this was producers making the call, yep, I need to assist this calf. We would run in there with our device and we would measure the forces applied during the calving. And so I'm going to show you a little bit of what our data looked like. So here's a nice, pretty simple, straightforward hand pull, manual pull. And you can see these guys did a really nice job of pulling and then releasing with each of the contractions of the cow, right? So you can see they did nice 4 contractions and out that calf came. So really nice, easy calving. In contrast, here's a different story with this calving, which was a really tough calving. And you can see they struggled for quite some time here trying to get those chains on the calf. They pulled really hard for a while here. You can see, on this graph, it goes up to 100. Here, we're already at 150. They pulled really hard for a while and they went, that's not getting us anywhere. Changed tactics, went and got the calf jack. You can see they're getting the calf jack set up. And then away they go, and they pulled, and they pulled, and they pulled. And here, at least they got their heads back and they remembered to pull with those contractions, right? So cow contracts, you pull, and then you give her a break. You pull, you give her a break. My guess is about here is where they delivered the head and shoulders, took a quick break. And then I think what happened next, oops, your faces are in the way, I'll move you over here. I think what happened over here was they had a hip lock, right? Because they had this nice release. And then, oh, we've got some more pressure again, right? So they got a hip lock. They had to give a couple big hard pull to get those hips through, and then the calf was delivered. So really neat data that kind of can tell us the story of what that calving actually looked like. So on average, when we sort of summed up all our data, we found that those manual calvings on average took less than 2 minutes, whereas our pulled calves, our mechanical pulls took well over 5 minutes. I see there's a question in the chat. let me pull that up. What do the numbers represent? Sorry, which numbers on the graphs? These numbers? Whoops, if I can go back. Was that question about the last slide? If I can go back. So those numbers essentially refer to kilos of force. Yeah, okay, perfect. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, so those are looking at kilos of force. So essentially, this is the summary of those numbers that I was showing you in the last graph. So for manual assistance, the maximum of force that was applied on both legs throughout the calving on average was over 200 pounds, versus for the mechanical, it was almost twice that. So 400 pounds of force being applied at the peak of that pull. And then overall, our manual assistants were 286 pound minutes. And I know you're going to ask me what the heck is a pound minute, and I'll describe that in a second. And then our mechanical assistants were 966.5 pound minutes. So the way that I like to think about these pound minutes, essentially, this is like having a 1,000-pound animal sit on you for 1 minute, or a 500-pound animal sit on you for 2 minutes, or a 250-pound animal sit on you for 4 minutes. So that's sort of the overall summary of how much force was applied on that calf to get it out. And so that's a pretty big number, right? That's quite a bit of force that was on average applied to those calves to get them out. Oops, get my slides moving again. There we go. So what does this all mean? Essentially, don't need to tell you guys this, we need to continue to focus on selection for calving ease, right? This still is an issue. We still see a lot of people pulling calves, and we're putting a lot of force on those calves to get out. So especially when we use a calf jack, I think calf jacks are a really important tool. They help us get those calves out quickly and efficiently, but we do need to use them quite carefully and be aware of the amount of force that we might be applying, and think about when we need to change tactics and potentially get them out the side door. Does it matter what gender they are? Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, so it does. Of course, bull calves tend to have larger birth weights, which tend to cause greater problems when it comes to calving. So definitely we see more of these are typically our bull calves, but that's more about birth weight than it necessarily is about the sex of the calf. Great question. Oops, when I click on things, my slides stop moving. There we go. Okay, so this is the high risk part of my presentation. Hopefully it's going to work. We're going to talk about getting them up. So the last thing I want to chat about is getting them fed. So I'm going to give you a really quick version of calf immunology. You learned a little bit already with Karen, which is awesome. I'm going to backtrack a little bit to start at birth. And so because, whoops, sorry, my slides are not moving again. So I wasn't sure exactly what the age group was going to be here tonight. So starting with some basic terminology. So antibodies is probably a term a lot of you have heard, but in case you haven't, those are just proteins that exist in our blood and the blood of cows that help us fight off infection. But because the bovine placenta, so the placenta being the sac that a calf lives inside within the womb of the cow, the type of placenta that cows have blocks the transfer of those antibodies from the blood of the cow into the calf, which means that our calves are born without any antibodies. And you add on top of that, they also have an immature and naive immune system. It means our calves are really vulnerable to disease shortly after birth. But nature is smart, and we have this idea or this compensation mechanism, if I can call it that, which is the passive immunity that they get through colostrum, right? So calves need to drink that colostrum, which is that first milk that their moms produce that has tons of antibodies on it. So they drink that colostrum and they get those antibodies that way instead of in the womb like other species. So we call this transfer of passive immunity. The trick is that the absorption of those antibodies really only occurs during the first 24 hours of life. And really the best window is that first 4 hours after birth. After that first 4 hours, their ability to absorb those antibodies really starts to drop off. So it's really important that we get that colostrum into them really quickly after birth. So we had a question about, is there something we can do to test it in these calves, especially the ones that we assist? Can we check something in these calves to predict whether or not they're going to get up and suck colostrum on their own within the first 4 hours, or whether or not we're going to have to help them get that colostrum? And so here's just a little bit of our data where we have calves that have a strong suckle reflex. So I should back up quickly and explain this picture. So the suckle reflex is essentially you stick a finger into the mouth of that newborn calf. And if they have a strong suckle reflex, their tongue will latch on and they'll start trying to suck on your finger right away like it was a teat. If they have a weak suckle reflex, and my vet students always laugh at me for imitating calves, but essentially they kind of go like this, and they don't really have any tongue tone. They don't really want your finger in their mouth. They don't try and suckle at all. So the weak calves here in green are the ones that failed to consume colostrum within 4 hours compared to the ones in brown that succeeded. If they had a strong suckle reflex, you can see way fewer of them failed and way more of them succeeded to consume colostrum in that first 4 hours. And actually, those that had a suckle reflex, weak suckle reflex, were 42 times more likely to fail to consume colostrum by 4 hours. So that weak suckle reflex really gave us a strong indication those calves weren't going to get up and suck on their own, that they were going to need help. So essentially, we can use that suckle reflex to help us predict whether or not a calf is going to get up and suck colostrum within that crucial first 4 hours after birth. So take home messages really from all of this that I hope you can take away from what I presented. Pulling a calf, especially with a calf jack, can put a lot of force on them. So we got to get them out, but we want to make sure we're conscious and careful about how we do that. We want to use the calf recovery position instead of hanging them upside down or over a gate. And we can check that suckle reflex to help us decide whether or not to help a calf get colostrum. And I see a question came in there. How much colostrum should a calf receive within the first 4 hours of life? Great question, Naomi. And as most epidemiologists will tell you, it depends. Really, ideally we want them to suck from their dam, right? So always the first strategy I would try is put that cow in a chute and try and get that calf to suck from the dam and latch on and nurse from their dam if I can. If I have to give that calf something, if it's a beef calf, I'm going to get as much as I can out of the cow if I can milk that cow, depending on how rangy she is and how willing she is to let me milk her. So ideally, I'd milk out everything I could from her and get that into the calf. If I'm going to use a colostrum replacement product, or if I have some on hand, I'm going to be aiming for 1 to 2 liters if I can get that into them. And my little soapbox that I will add, since you asked the question, is I would definitely not use dairy colostrum because it's not going to be good enough. We have all sorts of good questions coming in here. How do those weak versus strong? Yeah, great question, Jessica, translating over to the 24-hour mark. So in that study, pretty much all of our calves had strong suckle reflexes by 24 hours. Most of them came around at that 24-hour mark, and were no longer had the weak suckle reflexes by the time we hit 24 hours. How much does a hard birth really affect a calf from getting up and nursing? Yeah, great question, Morgan. And we've done some work. I could talk about this for hours. We have done some work looking at like how much muscle damage and things like that occurs to these assisted calves. And definitely those hard pulls, there's evidence those calves have a lot of, even if they're up and moving around and looking okay, they got a lot of bruised muscles, a lot of muscle damage, a lot of, that lactate. Have you heard of lactate, that feeling of burning muscles when you've worked out too much or you've gone for a run, you feel that lactic acid in your muscles? They have a lot of that circulating in their system. So hard pulls really do have a lot of effects on them and will definitely slow their time to get up and nurse and suck from their dams. Absolutely. And that actually, I pulled that slide out of there, but that was the other factor that predicted whether or not they'd suck from the dam within first 4 hours was the level of calving ease. So those hard pulls definitely more likely to not get up and suck. That was a double negative, but you know what I mean. Did I miss a question there? 10 cows. Oh yeah, I think that question is getting at if that not consuming colostrum within the first 4 hours was more likely to be heifers versus cows. I'm trying to remember back to our data, but I believe that it would be, I believe that heifers were more likely to have, they were definitely more likely to have assisted calvings. And I think they were also more likely to have calves that were slow to get up and suck. Should hard pulls get pain meds? Great question, Chelsea. We have we did a couple projects on that. Unfortunately, in our studies, we weren't able to measure any differences when we gave those calves Metacam, but our producers who didn't know we had product A and product B, they were getting a placebo or Metacam, and they didn't know which one was which, but they could guess. They told us, they're like, product B must be poison, those calves do poorly. And that was the placebo. So they said, you know, we kick them out of the barn faster, they look better, they get up and suck better. So we're actually doing another study where we're looking at calf behavior and cow behavior. So I think talking to people, they say Metacam absolutely helps a ton, wouldn't go without it. Our data hasn't quite supported that yet, but we're still working on that question. Sherry, what if they have we have a weak reflex at 24 hours? Great. Oh my gosh, you guys have great questions. You can cut me off, Belinda, if I need to stop talking. But yeah, we haven't looked at that in terms of research. Definitely, if they still have a weak suckle reflex at 24 hours, I'd probably bringing them into the barn and making sure that they're getting paired up with that dam. Because if they're not sucking, you know, if they're weak at that, they're going to start starving to death pretty quickly, especially if it's cold. But you also want to keep an eye on, sometimes they have a weak suckle reflex because they just drank from mom and they're full, and you're now a finger, so they don't know what's what. So it's a little bit different at 24 hours compared to right after birth, which is when we were measuring it. How long should you wait before you pull a calf? Great question, Faith. That's awesome. Yeah. And so can I keep answering these questions? Is that okay? Someone tell me to stop if I should. Belinda's nodding, so I'll keep going. Generally, what we say is, you know, you should be seeing progress every 30 minutes is sort of like, you want, if you walk away for 30 minutes, you come back, there should be some progress. And max from the time that the water breaks until the calf is delivered for a cow should be 60 minutes, and for a heifer should be 90 minutes. So we give heifers a little bit more time because, you know, things are stretching out and happening for the first time. It's always a little bit, there's a little bit of wiggle room to those guidelines, but you know, really from the time that you see the water break or the water bag, you know, is gone and you're seeing feet, that calf for a cow should be delivered in 60 minutes, for a heifer should be 90 minutes. And you want to see that progress at least every 30 minutes, you should see something changing essentially. So I just will wrap up by saying, you know, of course, all of this work is, I can't take credit for it. It's really the work of an amazing group of grad students, undergrad students, veterinary students. This is just some of the amazing team that I get to work with. These are the ones that have particularly been working on calf health stuff, but I've got lots of others that are doing all sorts of cool stuff. And really, they make my job so much fun to get to work with these grad students. So I have to make sure to acknowledge them and what they do. I think I missed a chat question there. Pros and cons of frozen colostrum and colostrum replacement. Great question, Lucy. The problem with frozen colostrum is always having enough and having some. I'm always a fan of being able to use your own colostrum from your own herd if you can. So having a store of some on hand is always good if you can do it, especially if you've got some nice quiet cows with high milk yield. Because the colostrum from your own cows is going to have the right antibody profile for particularly what's in your herd. And fresh colostrum or frozen colostrum has some other stuff in it that aren't necessarily in all colostrum replacement products, just in terms of like, you know, fats and antimicrobial peptides and all sorts of good things. But a colostrum replacement product, if it's a good one, which means that it has at least 100 grams of IgG in it, and is ideally a milk-based one, not a serum-based one, it can be a really important tool, because if you've got nothing else, a replacement product is ready, it's easy on the shelf, you've got it, and you can get it into them fast. So I think both are good. It just depends what's available to you. Great questions. And I think that was my last slide. I probably went over time. I put my email and my Twitter handle there, so feel free to reach out. When you are looking for grad school, please reach out, because I'm always looking for great grad students to join me.